interviewed by police as nurses and nutritionists have been quoted and misquoted in the media, and yet there still isn't a clear picture of Michael Jackson's physical and mental condition in the days leading up to his death. Yes, he was rehearsing to attempt a huge comeback, including 50 concert dates at London's O2 Arena, but according to one journalist on thedailybeast.com, a close confidant of Jackson told him the superstar was so determined to avoid his upcoming gig that he was looking for ways to somehow make himself sick to get out of his contract. This source, who says he was a top advisor to Jackson, spoke to the Daily Beast on the condition of anonymity and said, quote, "Like a child who doesn't want to go to school, Michael thought he'd get away from his obligations if he had a note from the doctor." Joining us now is Gerald Posner, the chief investigative reporter for thedailybeast.com. His latest article is titled "Jackson's Final Panic," and it details some tumultuous struggles inside of Michael Jackson's camp. Gerald, thank you so much for joining us.
Allison, great to be with you.
Now, you write that Jackson may have wanted out of this tour, but this was his big comeback tour. Why would he want to back out of it?
He didn't want to actually back out of it. What he wanted to do, Allison, was get back to what he thought the agreement was. Michael had negotiated this personally back in November in Las Vegas, across the table from Phillips, who was running AEG, the big concert promoter, and his aide, Dr. Tom Tom, Michael Jackson's spokesman, was with him. And they negotiated and argued for over 5 hours about the number of appearances that Michael would make. And what Michael thought they agreed to was 10. That's what he wanted to do, which would raise about $80 million. That was not enough to get him out of debt, but was going to make a big dent. What AEG wanted was 50. And what the contract was, it was eventually signed by his advisors. I talked to a lawyer on this, and I talked to one of the accountants, was for 50. But they will tell you that you could talk to Michael about business, and it was like talking Greek. You talked about dance, music, style, he was into it. But once you got into business details, he could phase out. And he was convinced that it was 10, so much so that in March, when he made the announcement, as you know, in London for this concert tour, he said, "This is it." That was the name of the tour. "I'm doing 10 performances in London, and they will be my last performances ever in London." He was then told after that conference that you have to do more, Michael. He refused to go to take the stand. He wouldn't take another press conference. They had to do press releases to say we've added 11 more dates. Then a week later, by March 10th, they had added 45, and then it went up to 50. So Michael wanted to do one concert with 5-day breaks between each one. They wanted him to do 50 with 1-day breaks between each one going into the spring of 2010. He was completely stressed out by that and didn't think he was capable physically of doing it.
Now, these are some pretty extraordinary claims that your source is making. Why do you trust this source?
I'll tell you why. Because it's not just one source. It's not as though, as you know, as a reporter, that I've just called up one person, they happen to tell me a wild tale in theory, and I say, "Oh, that sounds like a good thing, I'll print that." I ended up talking to a dozen people in here, including 6 of them, who gave me conversations, over 4 hours of conversations, who are involved in both his accounting team, his legal team, and people who have been with Jackson for the past year in a close association, who have worked for him and on the payroll. And what is absolutely clear here is that from November of last year, he bellyached, he complained, he moaned, and he was angry over the fact that he was committed to a greater number of concerts. He thought by March that he had gotten it down to 10, and when it turned out to be 50, he continued to complain about that. I even asked Dr. Conrad Murray whether he had complained to him as the physician on this, and he had no comment about it. But what is clear is that he wanted to reduce those 10, and if you look at the contract, AEG refuses to release it publicly. I've asked them for a comment. We've seen a copy of this. There is no out for Michael. If he doesn't show up at a concert, he gets a significant penalty. The one out is medical infirmity. And he talked to people in his own entourage about pretending he had the swine flu, whether he could pretend he was sick. None of those things obviously would work.
Why would he go to such extent, though? Why wouldn't, I mean, this is a man who could afford the best lawyers ever to break any kind of contract.
Because his advisors and lawyers wouldn't break it. They were the ones telling him, Allison, you've got to do all 50, because if you don't, you're going to lose the one thing that's prized, and that's your catalog. Half of your catalog with your Beatles songs is already owned by Sony. The other half, you have loans against them and you have liens against it. If you don't do all 50, and you then go to Vegas in the spring of 2010 and do a 6-month show like a Cirque du Soleil, but it will be you for $100 million, you risk losing your major asset. So they didn't want to break it. They wanted him to perform to do it. Now, what's interesting is that Michael, according to the person that I spoke to, had no question a drug prescription problem. And he thought, as many people do, that when they have their drugs, that they can control them and they know the limit. Look at Heath Ledger thought the same thing. Anna Nicole Smith thought the same thing. River Phoenix thought the same thing. People who are drug addicts think that they know the level and where they can go. But he asked the doctor, Michael did, the night that he was going to do this, if this is what he did, to stay over, because he was the safety net for Michael. In case Michael went too far in the drugs, that doctor could save him. We're going to know in a couple of weeks when the autopsy comes out. Either Michael died from mixing the wrong drugs, or he committed suicide from a massive overdose. And we'll find out if this is right.
Need just for the record, you stand by your story.
I do. To me, this is absolutely, I look at this, and it seems very likely that Michael Jackson may well have killed himself by accident, as opposed to doing a suicide himself.
The Daily Beast contributor Gerald Posner, he's also the author of Motown, Music, Money, Sex, and Power. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Allison.
Michael Jackson was the first